The conversation around the draft is starting to heat up, and for Dallas Cowboys fans, there's one scenario that continues to generate a lot of discussion and a lot of hope. The possibility of a top defensive prospect sliding down the board and landing right at the Cowboys pick is the kind of situation that can completely change the outlook of a season before a single game is even played. Every year, there are surprises in the draft, and every year a player projected to go early ends up falling further than expected. This time, the name that keeps coming up in conversations is Caleb Downs, and the idea of him being available when Dallas is on the clock is something that is slowly gaining more attention. When draft analysts begin to talk about unexpected slides, people usually dismiss it at first, but the reality is that it happens more often than fans think. Teams fall in love with certain positions, quarterbacks get pushed up the board, offensive tackles become priorities, and suddenly players who were once considered top 10 locks start slipping into the middle of the first round. That is where the Cowboys could potentially benefit. If the board starts to fall in a certain way, and if teams ahead of Dallas focus on other needs, the door could open for a player that many consider one of the best defensive talents in the entire class. One of the main reasons why this scenario is even being discussed is because of how the league historically values the safety position. Unlike quarterbacks, pass rushers, or elite wide receivers, safeties do not always get selected very early, even when they are extremely talented. Over the years, we have seen multiple examples of elite defensive backs who were projected to go very high, but ended up being selected later than expected. Teams sometimes overthink measurables, speed times, arm length, and physical profiles, and they end up passing on players who simply know how to play football at a very high level. That is where the conversation around Caleb Downs becomes very interesting. He may not have the perfect prototype size that some teams look for, and he may not be the type of player who dominates highlight reels with flashy interceptions every week, but what he does have is something that coaches value more than anything else: instincts, intelligence, and consistency. He is the type of player who understands a game, reads plays quickly, reacts fast, and positions himself in the right place before the play even develops. Those are the kinds of players who make a defense better as a whole, not just through big plays, but through reliability and leadership on the field. If you watch his film, what stands out is not just the big moments, but the small details. The way he reads the quarterback, the way he steps into the box to stop the run, the way he communicates with teammates before the snap, and the way he adjusts during plays. Those things do not always show up on stat sheets, but they are incredibly important for building a strong defense. A player like that can become the backbone of a secondary and can help organize the entire defensive unit. Another important factor in this discussion is team needs. The Cowboys have been looking for consistency and leadership in the secondary, especially from players who can play multiple roles. Modern defenses require versatility. You need players who can cover receivers, support the run, blitz when necessary, and move around the formation depending on the situation. A player who can line up as a safety on one play, move into the slot on another, and come down into the box on the next play is extremely valuable in today's game. That type of flexibility allows defensive coordinators to disguise coverages and create confusion for opposing quarterbacks. There's also the leadership aspect, which is something that coaches always talk about, but fans sometimes overlook. Players who play near the middle of the field often become the communicators of a defense. They see everything in front of them, they help adjust coverages, and they make sure everyone is lined up correctly. Having a player who can handle that responsibility at a young age can change the identity of a defense. It is not just about talent. It is about presence, confidence, and football intelligence. Of course, for this scenario to become reality, a lot of things would have to happen on draft night. Teams ahead of Dallas would need to prioritize other positions, and there would need to be a run on quarterbacks, offensive linemen, or pass rushers early in the draft. That is usually what pushes other talented players down the board. It only takes a few unexpected picks to completely change how the draft unfolds. And once a player starts to slide, sometimes multiple teams pass because they are focused on specific needs rather than taking the best player available. That is why draft night is always unpredictable. Fans build mock drafts, analysts make projections, and everyone thinks they know how the first round will go, But every year, there are surprises that nobody expected. Players projected to go early fall, players projected to go later get picked early, and teams make decisions that confuse everyone watching. That unpredictability is exactly what gives Cowboys fans hope in this situation. Because if everything went exactly according to projections every year, there would never be any surprises or dream scenarios. The Cowboys have benefited from unexpected draft slides before, and when that happens, it can completely change the direction of the franchise. Getting a player who was not expected to be available at your pick always feels like a huge win, and it often leads to long-term success if the player develops the way teams expect. That is why so many fans are paying attention to this possibility and following every bit of draft news and analysis leading up to draft night, because all it takes is one unexpected slide for everything to change. As the draft gets closer, the discussions inside front offices become more intense, and this is where things really start to change. Teams begin to finalize their boards, medical reports become more important, private workouts and interviews start influencing decisions, and suddenly the rankings that the public sees are not the same rankings that teams actually have. This is one of the biggest reasons why players slide every year. It is not always about talent. Sometimes it is about scheme fit. Sometimes it is about medical concerns. Sometimes it is about personality. And sometimes it is simply because teams ahead already have strength at that position. For Dallas, this would be the ideal situation because adding a versatile defensive back could immediately improve multiple areas of the defense. Instead of drafting a player who needs several years to develop, they could potentially get someone who contributes right away. A player with strong instincts and experience playing in big games usually adapts faster to the professional level, especially when compared to players who rely only on athletic ability. Football intelligence often translates quicker than pure physical traits. Another important factor is how the modern game is played. Offenses are faster, receivers move all over the field, tight ends are more athletic than ever, and running backs are heavily involved in the passing game. Because of this, defenses need players who can cover multiple types of opponents. A traditional safety who only stays deep in coverage is no longer enough. Teams now look for players who can move around, cover slot receivers, defend tight ends, support the run, and occasionally rush the quarterback. Versatility is no longer a luxury, it is a necessity. When you look at the Cowboys' defense, you can see that adding a player with that kind of versatility would give the defensive coordinator many more options. It would allow the defense to disguise formations, rotate coverage after the snap, and confuse quarterbacks. Defenses become much harder to read when players can line up in different positions before the snap and move into different roles once the play begins. That unpredictability often leads to mistakes from opposing offenses, and mistakes lead to turnovers and big defensive plays. There's also the long-term perspective to consider. Drafting is not only about the upcoming season, but about building a team that can compete for several years. Adding a smart, versatile defensive player can help stabilize the secondary for a long time. Players who understand the game at a high level often become leaders in the locker room and help younger players develop as well. That kind of influence goes beyond statistics and highlights, and it is something that successful teams always value. Of course, none of this matters if the player is not available when Dallas is on the clock. That is why so much of this conversation is based on probability and historical patterns. History shows that safeties sometimes fall in the draft, even very talented ones. History also shows that every year there are unexpected picks that change the entire order of the first round. All it takes is one team to make a surprising decision, and then another team reacts, and suddenly the draft board looks completely different from what everyone expected just a few minutes earlier. Fans often forget that teams do not draft based on public rankings or mock drafts. They draft based on their own evaluations, their own coaching systems, and their own roster needs. A player ranked in the top 10 by analysts might be ranked 20th on a team's internal board. Another player that fans are not talking about might be ranked very high by a team because he fits their system perfectly. That difference between public perception and team evaluation is what creates surprises every year. So as draft night approaches, The most important thing for Cowboys fans is to understand that nothing is impossible. Unlikely scenarios happen almost every year in the draft. Players slide, teams reach for need, trades happen unexpectedly, and the entire first round can change with just a few surprising decisions. If the board falls in the right way, Dallas could find itself in a position to draft a player that many people never expected to be available at that point. And if that moment comes, it could be one of those draft night situations that fans remember for years, the kind of moment where the team stays patient, waits for the board to fall, and then selects a player who ends up becoming a key piece of the team for a long time. Those are the moments that can change the direction of a franchise, and that is why the possibility of a draft slide always creates so much excitement and discussion leading up to draft night, because sometimes the best move a team can make is simply to wait, stay calm, and take advantage of the opportunity when it appears. Another element that makes this situation even more interesting is the psychological side of the draft. When a player starts to fall further than expected, some teams begin to question why it is happening. They start wondering if other teams know something they do not, whether it is related to medical evaluations, scheme fit concerns, or internal grading differences. That hesitation can sometimes cause a chain reaction where multiple teams pass on a player simply because others already did. Then suddenly a player who should have been selected much earlier is still available in the middle of the round, and one team benefits massively from everyone else overthinking the situation. This is where smart teams separate themselves from the rest. The best organizations trust their evaluations, trust their coaching staff, and trust their system. If they believe a player fits their defense and can make an immediate impact, they do not worry about where he was projected or why he is still available. They simply take the player and move forward. Those decisions often look obvious years later when that player becomes an important part of a successful team. Draft history is full of examples where the most successful picks were not the obvious early selections, but the players who fell and were taken by teams that stayed patient. From a roster-building perspective, adding a defensive back who can play multiple roles would also give Dallas more flexibility in future seasons. When you have versatile players, you're not forced to draft strictly for need every year. You can draft the best player available more often because your defense already has pieces that can adapt to different roles. That flexibility is extremely valuable when building a competitive team over several seasons, because injuries happen, contracts expire, and roster needs change constantly. And this is why the draft is always one of the most important moments of the year for any franchise. One smart decision can strengthen a team for years, and one missed opportunity can be remembered just as long. If the Cowboys find themselves on the clock with an opportunity to select a player who is not expected to be available, it will be a moment that requires confidence, preparation, and conviction. Because sometimes the biggest victories in the draft are not the picks everyone expects, but the opportunities that appear unexpectedly when the board starts to fall in a surprising way. That's it for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to keep receiving exclusive news about the Dallas Cowboys, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. We always look forward to your comments and opinions. See you in the next video.